I'm John Little of OmegaShock.com, and this is the Weekend SHOCKCAST for Saturday, July 12th, 2014. The idea that my beautiful country, America, will be attacked and destroyed fills me with horror. It is such a wonderful place with so many wonderful people. The idea that her cities would become wastelands and her people dead or dispossessed, well, it's almost beyond comprehension. Unfortunately, the clues left behind by John the Revelator show us that this is an inevitability, and Ezekiel chimes in with a coming of Gog and Magog that leaves no room for our America. Furthermore, a close look at America's goading of Russia leads us to a conviction that we truly are on course for the fulfillment of a terrifying prophecy. However, there is some room for speculation in how America will meet her end, and there is some glimmer of hope in the book of Revelation that not everyone in America will die. I have applied my own speculative thoughts towards an attempt to understand the future, and there does not appear to be much hope available for those who do not prepare. Most of those who die will fall at the hands of their neighbors or at the lack of food or water. The survivors will be refugees in their own country or imprisoned by a resurgent America under new management, clawing its way back into power to become the eighth head and the beast. What arises from America's rubble will shock the world and leave them in awe, and no one will be able to stand before this dark and evil version of the country that we once knew. In the meantime, the world will experience the greatest solar flare in the history of mankind, knocking out the electrical and electronic infrastructure of the world from Russia and the Middle East to Europe and Africa, reaching even North and South America. It will be the perfect situation for the beast to rise and take over, with no one in any condition to resist. The good news is that it will take some time for this beast system to grab hold of the world and then consolidate her power. The new Christians in the Middle East will have a chance to grow and flourish. Those of you that have prepared will be able and ready to serve God and help others out of harm's way. The other bit of good news is that there is still some time before these events begin. There may even be a couple or more years before America is destroyed. But a lot will happen between now and then that will be devastating. But I will leave that for another series. The main point should be clear to all of us. Cataclysmic disaster is coming. You must seek the direction of the Lord with all of your heart and follow His will as you prepare for a dark and terrible future. Are you going to be ready for this? That's a link. Do more than just think about it. So, what did we talk about this week? This week we talked about the course of events that is leading to a nation-killing attack on America by Russia. We started with the fact that the global elites / Illuminati are not unified and perfectly willing to kill each other. We went on to cover the biblical clues that point to America's destruction, and I mentioned the nuclear reality that is forcing Russia to attack. Then we discussed how it would work before going over the events that would happen between now and then. So let's talk about that. On Monday, it was America Destroyed, Part 1, The Game of Princes. It is one thing to know that a certain event will happen. It is something else to know why and how. And then when you see it in action, well, it brings a level of certainty that leaves nothing left for doubt. That's why, after our apocalyptic discussion last week, I dug deeper into the possibility of a nuclear attack on the United States, secretly hoping that I would find some other explanation for the wounded head of Revelation 13:3. Unfortunately, I found far more verification than I wanted to see. There is a nuclear bullseye painted over the U.S., which means that you are in harm's way. A close relative of mine was a 33rd-degree Mason, a worshiper of Satan, and deeply involved with those who were members of the Illuminati, although I doubt that he was deeper into the Illuminati than the fringes. I say all that because he would tell us things that I never understood until I found out who and what the Illuminati were. One of those things was, quote, "They are looking for someone to unite them," close quote. Those they are the elites, or even the Illuminati themselves, although he never actually identified who the they were. And as I have delved deeper and deeper into who and what the Illuminati are, I see a tremendous amount of disunity, a disunity designed to kill off the weak and strengthen the whole. The many factions within the elites have a habit of killing each other off, and you can find this habit at every level of the Illuminati power structure. Think of it as the mafia, but much, much bigger and far, far more evil. I say all that to answer a puzzling question that so many have. Why would someone who was clearly one of the elites attack someone else who was clearly a fellow member of the elites? The answer is that they do it all the time. In fact, they often talk about it openly. Here's George Soros, one of the many public faces of the Illuminati. Quote, "The main obstacle to a stable and just world order is the United States, and the Bush administration is setting the wrong agenda. The Bush agenda is nationalistic. Changing the attitude and policies of the United States remains my top priority." George Soros, 2006. Let me boil that down for you. George Soros was upset that the American elites weren't cooperating with his elites. We saw evidence of that just a few weeks ago at the recent Bilderberg meeting in Copenhagen, Denmark. The European Bilderbergers wanted to cool things down with Russia over Ukraine, and the U.S. Bilderbergers wanted the opposite. Ultimately, both sides want the same thing. They're just arguing over who gets to run the world, and yes, they are willing to kill over that. However, they won't be the people that wind up dying. You and I do that. To them, we are just pawns in the game of princes. Because Obama was in power, I had been wondering if the American CFR/trilateralist elites were going to take a passive approach to bring the U.S. into a new world order. When I saw the CIA coup in Ukraine just a few months ago, I knew that the American elites had not given up on their vision of empire. They wanted it all and were going to take second place to no one. Make no mistake, the takeover of Ukraine is a dagger at the heart of Russia, and Russia cannot ignore it. The American elites understand this, so the coup in Ukraine wasn't the result of some overzealous black ops unit working out of Langley, Virginia. No, the CIA and the U.S. State Department understand the implications of what they were doing, and they went and did it anyway. Furthermore, they think that this is a winning strategy. And the problem is that they haven't spent any time reading the Bible. Are you ready for this? On Tuesday, it was America Destroyed, Part 2, Bible Signs. In this game of princes that I talked about yesterday, the Illuminati think that they are following their own game plan. Their problem lies with the fact that their opponent, the creator of the universe, has them outfoxed. Whether they like it or not, they are following God's plan. That plan has been revealed to us in the Bible, and it is both a promise and a warning. It is a promise of victory, but it also stands as a warning of the price for that victory. Each of us will share in the payment of that price, and it will be worth it. My hope is that you will be ready when the bill comes due. If I did not know with complete certainty that the last days would play out exactly as the Bible said, I would be mystified by what is happening in Ukraine, Syria, Egypt, Iraq, Russia, and the United States. It's all happening exactly how the Bible describes it, and there's a focus to that description. That focus is almost exactly 1 kilometer square, and it is the center of human history, Jerusalem. And it is the principal reason why the last days began on June 7th, 1967. Gog and Magog comes down to attack Israel. The seventh head is wounded as described in Revelation 13:3. The seventh head is healed and becomes the eighth head in the beast. The Antichrist comes to Jerusalem and declares himself to be God, and I don't really understand any of that. Yes, I get the details. I know that God placed his name there and chose his friend Abraham to live there, along with his descendants. I know all about how Jerusalem is the city chosen by God above all others. I know about the temple and the people of God who were supposed to worship there. I know about the millennial kingdom and the offerings. I get all of that and much more. But nothing in the Bible really indicates the core reason why that tiny patch of ground is so important, except to say that it is. It is an incredible mystery, and I can talk about Jerusalem all day long. After having lived there for so long, I consider it to be my home. My favorite church is there, along with my favorite pastor, my favorite bookstore, and my favorite shawarma stand. There is no place on earth that I love more than Jerusalem. But I will go into none of that because I need to speak of the signs in the Bible that talk about America's destruction. My thinking starts with Gog and Magog. Click that link and you will see that my views of the conditions surrounding the coming of Gog and Magog have changed over the last 3 years. And the revelations of the past few weeks have added to my understanding of what and why all of this will happen. It starts with the petrodollar system, and it ends with Imperial America's desire to preserve her empire in that petrodollar system. To put it another way, without the petrodollar, the American empire falls. Furthermore, Israel is the linchpin of the Middle East, and Jerusalem is the linchpin to Israel. Without Israel, the OPEC states of Saudi Arabia and the Persian Gulf are at the mercy of anyone who controls Israel. It may not seem so when you look at the map, but it's very, very true. A closer look at history and the geopolitical landscape of the Middle East will make this abundantly clear. You cannot control the Middle East if you do not control Israel. It's as simple as that. All of that is why Gog and Magog will come down to attack Israel. Why does the coming of the Grand Alliance of Gog and Magog mean that America is destroyed? Because America must defend Israel to maintain her grip on the petrodollar. The U.S. would never allow any foreign power to threaten Israel. It is literally impossible for America to fail to go to Israel's defense over such an invasion. And it has nothing to do with AIPAC or any love that some Americans might have for Israel. The U.S. government hates Israel with a passion and would love to see her destroyed. But the American elites love their power and wealth more than they hate Israel. Israel really is the geopolitical center of the Middle East. That raises another important question. Why doesn't the United States stop Gog and Magog? Because she can't. That brings me to the wounding of the seventh head in Revelation 13:3. I know that Revelation doesn't specifically identify which head, but the other heads have already fallen. So we are left with the seventh. Over the past 2 weeks, I have proven that America must be that seventh head. And as I look back over the evidence, I cannot see any other way of looking at this. America is the greatest empire that has ever lived, and it conforms to all of the prophecies about this penultimate empire at the end of time. And this second-to-last empire will be given a deadly wound. Unfortunately, Revelation 13 refers to it as a slaying wound. It's not a disease or sickness. It's not some protracted revolution or internal struggle. It is a slaying. And it's a single event. It's not multiple wounds. It's just one wound, as in a single strike from an axe or a sword. And it's wounded in such a way that she dies slowly enough for her to be healed before expiring. I don't want to lay too much on just an analysis of syntax, but syntax does limit the possible attacks that might be used against the United States. This isn't a gradual process of decay, and it isn't a financial collapse. Otherwise, it wouldn't require the obvious, even wondrous, healing described in Revelation 13. That brings us to the point where I show you the decisions that are being made right now to put the process of America's destruction in motion. It has already begun, and it is only a matter of time before it arrives. We'll talk about that tomorrow. Are you ready for this? On Wednesday, it was America Destroyed, Part 3, Nuclear Decisions. Obama is the most evil president in American history. The fact that he was reelected says much about the kind of nation America has become. But I had hoped that there was a silver lining to this awful presidency, a reduction in the threat of nuclear war. That vain hope was dashed when I saw the CIA's muddy bootprints all over events in Ukraine. If Russia had any doubts about America's intentions, you can bet that she is now certain that America is determined to destroy Russia. Worse, it is merely confirmation of reports that Russia has been getting for years. As I said yesterday, the Bible's account of an attack on Israel, Gog and Magog, is more than enough proof that something dreadful has happened to America. The U.S. must defend the petrodollar system or her empire ceases to exist. The fact that she can't means that imperial America has fallen. Add to this Revelation's description of a deadly wound happening to such an empire as America's, well, suspicion becomes certainty. But that certainty can still leave room for doubt, so let's remove all doubt by digging up the decisions America has been making that will lead her to this deadly wound. When the Soviet Union finally collapsed on December 26, 1991, there was nothing that protected her from her enemies except for nuclear weapons. And even that was under threat as her financial system spiraled out of control. It hit rock bottom in 1999, but she still scraped up enough cash to invest in the modernization of her nuclear weapons systems. In 1997, as their GDP was about to fall by more than 50%, they put into service the Topol-M, also known as the SS-27. This missile was specifically designed to survive a nuclear attack so that it could be used in retaliation. And it was also designed to evade America's anti-missile defense system, and it is apparently still able to do so. The capabilities of this missile were loudly publicized in hopes of making any potential enemy think twice before attacking Russia. Fast forward to 2006 and an article that shook the world of foreign policy. It appeared in the CFR's magazine, Foreign Affairs, and was titled The Rise of U.S. Nuclear Primacy by Keir A. Lieber and Darrell G. Press. Through careful and irrefutable analysis, they indicated that America was developing the ability to launch a nuclear first strike and defeat any retaliation, which they called nuclear primacy. This was not good news for those who were suspicious of American intentions, which was probably why the Russians rolled out an upgraded missile, the RS-24 Yars, in 2010. If you have a history of being attacked and run over by history, you tend to treat threats seriously, and this threat was big. During this time, the CIA went in and overthrew the government of Georgia on Russia's southern border, installing U.S. ally Mikhail Saakashvili. The U.S. then handed Georgia military training, money, and weapons. Saakashvili had dreams of joining NATO, a desire that the U.S. State Department encouraged. This led to Georgian overconfidence and the Russo-Georgian War of 2008. Georgia was defeated, but Russia was rattled and feeling threatened by the U.S. The Obama administration attempted a reset with Russia in 2009 and presented Russian Foreign Minister Lavrov with a button labeled Pergruzka, or overload, claiming that they meant reset. With all that the United States had been doing, the Russians would have undoubtedly wondered if the Americans were really interested in a new U.S.-Russian relationship or just an overload. Then, just 2 years later in 2011, Turkey, Saudi Arabia, and the CIA launched the uprising in Syria to stop a certain natural gas pipeline. That pipeline would have stretched from Iran through Iraq and to a Mediterranean port on the coast of Syria. The uprising killed the deal, which was a big blow to Russia because the Russian company Gazprom had an enormous stake in that pipeline. Worse, this uprising in Syria threatened Russia's naval presence in Syria's second-largest port, Tartus, and her influence in the region. Add to this direct Saudi involvement in stirring up trouble in Chechnya within Russia, and you have a very, very unhappy bear. All of this would have been extremely bad news for Russia, but as deplorable as the situation was, cooler heads in the Kremlin might have dismissed these moves by America and her allies as just a bit of overconfident irrationality. But all of that changed this year. When the CIA and the U.S. State Department overthrew the government of Ukraine in February of this year, they pointed a dagger at the heart of Russia. America had physically breached Russia's geopolitical boundaries and threatened the Russian heartland. It was a threat that could not be ignored. Please understand that Russia's unfortunate history has been one of hostile neighbors and indefensible borders. That's why Russia considered it vital to have either mountains or water separating the Russians from their neighbors. By overthrowing Viktor Yanukovych and installing a U.S. puppet in Ukraine, America trampled all over what Russia considers to be a vital interest, the Carpathian Mountains. Without the Carpathians as a barrier to NATO, Russia was wide open for invasion, and it was an invitation to a return to the nightmare of Russian history. Whatever reason America had in doing what she did in Ukraine, the Russians would have seen this as a revelation of American intentions. Everything America had done in the past would have been cast in a new light, and there could be no question in my mind that the Russian government now felt a real and present threat to their existence. Unfortunately, we aren't done. Now we are hearing that U.S. military strategists are lobbying for a nuclear strike on Russia. And if we are hearing about this, you can only guess at what Russia is hearing. Have we gone beyond the lobbying stage and directly into planning a nuclear attack on Russia? My suspicion is that they have, and there is some evidence to back up these thoughts. In addition to whatever hard evidence that we may have, please remember that Russia is an active threat to the petrodollar system, and the United States will do anything to keep that system alive, including the murder of tens of millions of Russians in a nuclear first strike. Furthermore, Russia knows that it cannot hope to survive a nuclear first strike, and that leaves only one option: strike first. Now, many of you will want to claim that Russia could never pull this off, that it would be an impossible task, and most in the U.S. government would agree with you. But are you sure? More on that tomorrow. Are you ready for this? On Thursday, it was America Destroyed, Part 4, The Deadly Options. America is on a death march to ruin. I laid out yesterday just a few of the events that are convincing the Russians of America's intention to destroy Russia. Worse, we have evidence that the U.S. is actively planning a nuclear first strike. To the Russians, death lies at the door, and the only hope for the bear is a first strike of her own. So the question is, how would such an attack succeed without the U.S. retaliating and destroying Russia? That's a good question. There are several ways that Russia could pull off such an attack that would leave the U.S. incapable of responding. The greatest general to ever shape modern warfare was Sun Tzu. His Art of War is required reading for every military officer of every army in every nation of the world. You violate his rules of war at your peril. Well, General Sun had this to say about our current subject, and unfortunately I can't read Chinese, so we'll move on. What a remarkably terse comment. Here's a translation. When you surround an army, leave an outlet free. Do not press a desperate foe too hard. That's for when you are the attacker. But when you are the defender, he says, in death ground, fight. When you are stuck in a corner with no way out but death, then attack. And as I said in November, quote, Russia knows death ground well because they have been sitting in the middle of it for more than 1,000 years, which is why Russia, throughout their history, has been seeking to expand until they find a defensible position. They have found that defensible position, and it currently rests at the mountain ranges that surround Russia and her close allies, close quote. However, I wrote that piece before the idiots in Washington were successful in their coup in Kiev. By now, it is clear to the Russians that we are pushing them squarely into that hopeless situation that Sun Tzu calls death ground. To them, there is no way of escape and no hope for survival. Read again what I said yesterday, and then watch the video that I present in the article. It's labeled, "The Truth Seeker, U.S. Plans for Strike on Russia, E40. So let me ask you a question. Do the Russians think that they are in Sun Tzu's death ground? It's clear to me that they think that they are, and that's really all that matters. Remember that it's their fingers over the launch button, not ours. But wait. I hear you saying that an attack on the United States cannot hope to succeed. I understand why you would say that, but those are the famous last words of all the empires that have come before us. So let me remind you of a famous quote by the famous 18th century writer Samuel Johnson. Quote, "Depend on it, sir, when a man knows that he is to be hanged in a fortnight, it concentrates his mind wonderfully." Samuel Johnson. The Russians are as intelligent as we are, if not more so. I've worked with their programmers and engineers for years and found them to be extremely gifted. If you want to know who was responsible for the technology boom in Israel, look no further than the Jews who immigrated to Israel from Russia. So the threat of destruction will motivate these intelligent men and women to find a chink in America's armor. And unfortunately, those vulnerabilities are numerous. What kind of attack could the Russians hope to succeed with? There is one that should concentrate all of our minds. This website got started because I was foolish enough to ask a question in 2007 and get an answer a little over 3.5 years later. On September 13th, 2007, I wrote this, quote, "I've been thinking about Ahmadinejad's confident claims that he can take out the U.S. and Israel and achieve dominance for Islam. How could he possibly do that without the help of thermonuclear bombs in the multi-megaton range? We also call them hydrogen bombs or H-bombs, and they are beyond his capability to make, and I can't believe that Russia would give him any." Close quote. That was how I started an article that I titled Doomsday. It was horrifyingly real, but still theoretical. It was my sincere hope that none of it would come to pass, but for the first time I could see how possible it was. You can see a link in the article. I threw in a number of things in there and accelerated the timeline so that it would fit within the Mayan calendar foolishness that I've never believed. And if you're going to do something that dismal, well, have some fun. Then 3.5 years later, I saw this video. It was titled, Glenn Beck, Iranian Regime Preparing for 12th Imam, Part 3. I was shocked out of my gourd. Everything that I had said 3.5 years previously was coming true, and I had been completely oblivious. That started a process of digging into the facts that led to the launch of this site. Then Christine Lagarde, head of the IMF, gave a bizarre introduction to her speech at the January 15th National Press Club luncheon. It was chock full of Masonic occult symbolism. It was hard to interpret that speech as anything but a signal to someone about something that was coming this July. Well, Frank Brady thought about this for a bit and wrote this article, entitled The Monday After Independence Day. That article lays out a scenario in which an EMP attack destroys America. Here's the key part of this fictional account. Quote, "The Kwangmyong Song 3 weighed nearly 200 pounds and was roughly the size of an apartment-sized washing machine. When its fission payload detonated at 10:11 a.m., local time in broad daylight more than 300 miles above Indianapolis, the flash that accompanied the resultant explosion was barely noticeable from the ground. The event certainly did not escape the attention of Captain Kevin Reynolds, duty officer of the North American Aerospace Defense Command at Peterson Air Force Base in Colorado Springs. He reached quickly for the red telephone, but it was already much too late. Although U.S. Defense Department officials claimed that the low yield of Pyongyang's nuclear weapons tests was evidence of failure, they were either spectacularly wrong or deliberately deceptive. North Korea was intent on developing a hegemon-killing super EMP weapon, not merely an atomic bomb. Instead of wasting the weapon's power in the generation of explosive blast, heat, and light, energy was diverted to produce a gamma-ray pulse more powerful than would have been produced by a much larger thermonuclear fusion device in the multi-megaton range. Upon detonation, every electronic device between the front range of the Rockies and the Atlantic not shielded by a Faraday cage was rendered instantly and permanently inoperable. Close quote. That satellite, the Kwangmyong-song 3 Unit 2, really does tumble its way across our skies in orbit around Earth. Is it really collecting data on crop yields and the weather as they claim? Or is it a super EMP weapon? That is a very good question. But think through the implications. If North Korea struck the United States, who would the United States retaliate against? Yes, they would nuke the North Koreans back to the Stone... Okay, so they already are at the Stone Age. So, back to something age, leaving no one around to say who really did it. Got the picture? There are a host of ways for the Russians to launch an EMP attack without the U.S. being able to lay the blame on Moscow or even Beijing. Of course, the Russians might not stop there. In fact, I'm not sure that they can trust that an EMP attack would be enough to put the U.S. out of commission. After all, an EMP attack has never been tried before. That's why they might use nuclear weapons as well. I've already described how current Russian warheads can evade U.S. anti-missile defenses, but there's also something else. The Spetsnaz. There are reports that these guys are all over the place in the U.S. Whether this is true or not, I leave for you to decide, except that there is this one point. There are only 3 missile bases in the U.S. with operational ICBMs. So the question is, how many Russian Special Forces personnel would it take to neutralize these 3 missile bases? Probably not as many as you'd think. However, there are U.S. nuclear weapons platforms in quite a few other places in the world and under the sea. Do the Russians have a way of neutralizing the threat of a second strike from the U.S.? I don't know, but a sufficiently motivated Russia might come up with one and may already have done so. Is it possible that Russia already can track U.S. submarines and nuclear-capable bombers? We'll see. We have heard reports of Russian electromagnetic countermeasures, or ECM, being years ahead of what the U.S. has right now. They might be able to neutralize what the U.S. has. The point is that Revelation 13:3 talks about a single slaying wound. And the only thing that I can think of that would conform to that wording would be a nuclear attack. However, I may be too narrow-minded. Please feel free to share what you think might happen, as so many of you already have. Just remember that Revelation 13 indicates that this deadly wound appears to be impossible to recover from, and everyone in the world sees it. This cannot be some kind of silent, invisible attack that the world only understands years later as journalists piece together events. This is real time, folks. To put it another way, this is an event in which the United States is visibly slain, but is rescued before she finally dies. Furthermore, that rescue gives Gog and Magog enough time to come down and attack a defenseless Israel. And there are lots of ways that could happen too. Are you ready for this? On Friday, it was America Destroyed, Part 5, Between Now and Then. My hope is that we have time before Russia feels forced to act against the United States. I believe that there are some indications that this is the case. So here's the big question. What else would need to happen to finally convince Russia that a nuclear attack is the only answer to American aggression? I'm afraid that this is difficult to determine because it all rests upon America's actions. Also, there's an internal political dynamic within the Kremlin that is unique to Russia and opaque to those of us on the outside. So let's take a look at a few factors that play a role in our future. There is a balance of power within the Kremlin. On the one side we have the Siloviki, and on the other the Civiliki. I wrote about these two groups in February, so allow me to paste in what I said there. Quote, when Putin came to power, he set up two centers of influence within the Russian government, the Siloviki and the Civiliki. The Siloviki were the politicians and bureaucrats with strong military or intelligence backgrounds. The Civiliki were the economists, sociologists, and career bureaucrats without KGB links, but with connections to Putin going back to his days in St. Petersburg in the 90s. These two groups were to compete with each other for the betterment of Russia and Putin. But that didn't work out quite as well as planned because the Civiliki dropped the ball and made a mess of things. With the decline of the dovish side, Civiliki, of the Kremlin, the hawks, or the Siloviki, rose to prominence. Not a good thing. Do separate searches for Siloviki and Civiliki. You'll find that the Civiliki articles are older and far less numerous than the Siloviki articles. And the Civiliki don't even have a Wikipedia page. I know that this is hardly a scientific analysis, but it should tell you something about Russia's direction and Putin's options. With the Siloviki looking over Putin's shoulder, a softly approach isn't going to go over well. If Putin appears to sit this fight out, the Russian generals are going to get restive and whisper about Vladimir's lack of resolve. Putin cannot allow that if he wants to stay in power. That's why he needs to produce results quickly. Of course, we're assuming that Putin isn't one of the Siloviki himself. Remember that he was a lieutenant colonel in the KGB until he chose to retire and enter politics in 1991. No one reaches that rank in the Komitet Gosudarstvennoy Bezopasnosti, or KGB, without being politically aggressive. Close quote. At the time of that writing, I was working my way through what was really going on in Ukraine. Unfortunately, it's gotten a lot clearer. So those are the two factions within the leadership of Russia. You can bet that the Siloviki are already convinced of the need for a nuclear attack on the United States. But the Civiliki aren't going to be so easily won over. Furthermore, you can see the fingerprints of the Civiliki in Russia's moves to isolate the US dollar as the world's reserve currency. Those are economic moves that the civilian side of Russian power understand how to use. The problem is that this is a direct threat to American power, and there's only one way that America knows how to handle such threats: military invasion. America has invaded a massive number of countries over the last 60 years, so this is going to be more of the same. And as I've said before, America cannot allow the petrodollar system to fail. Please, you must understand that. The petrodollar system is the linchpin of the American empire, and there is nothing that America will not do to preserve it. So, what will America do next? Invade the Middle East. With every report that you hear of OPEC contemplating a switch away from pricing crude oil in dollars, that is one more step towards an American invasion of the Middle East. Saudi Arabia and the other Persian Gulf states cannot be allowed to move away from the US dollar. And America is prepared to invade the Middle East to scare them into staying with the US dollar, if necessary. This could be one of the reasons why America has been backing ISIS. Each step that ISIS takes towards more and more power is a step towards the excuse that the U.S. needs to invade the Middle East. After a certain point, all that it would take to cause that invasion would be something that we've seen before, a 9/11 style attack. The U.S. government has been hinting that ISIS is planning such an attack. Gotta love those CIA talking points. And you can bet that this attack will happen at the most convenient time for America to invade the Middle East and protect the petrodollar system. They call such things a false flag attack, but you have my permission to call it anything that you want. When it happens, just remember to ask the question, qui bono? Who benefits? So, I guess that you would say that the efforts of the Civiliki, the doves, in Russia would have backfired, and the Siloviki, the Hawks, would have the opportunity to act on their plans, and that is when the attack that I described yesterday would happen. Are there other possible scenarios? I'm sure that there are, but I find these ISIS guys to be fascinating in the same way that Hitler was. We'll see how all this works out, but please, as we move forward from here, be on the lookout for those events that will drive Russia towards implementing a nuclear attack on the U.S. Are you ready for this? That's a link. Do more than just think about it. This has been the Weekend Shockcast for Saturday, July 12th, 2014. I'm John Little of OmegaShock.com.